Um, Harikatha, essentially, Harikatha or Shivakatha, as some people like to call it, are stories about Hari or Shiva. They are primarily, the purpose is to tell a devotional story, to bring the message of devotion based on the stories of great devotees who had to go through various hardships and challenges, and they overcome it because of their faith in their particular Ishtadevata, which is either Hari or Shiva. And telling of these stories with songs and other things has generally been known as Harikatha. And some people use that Harikatha in a very general sense. It includes all stories, including Shiva. But others tend to differentiate. In recent times, the Shiva followers want to give it a special identity, so they call it Shivakatha, but they're essentially the same. And then the third one is I think I might have mentioned it, this is pure upanyasa or pravachana, where there is not necessarily, it's not so much performative as a discourse. Often, again, depending on the organizers, if there could be a 2 or 3 month, 6 months Ramayana pravachana, where the scholar might practically go through the whole text. Even there, they might select a bit, but every kanda, and bring these stories, translate it into the vernacular, not the shlokas translation, but the story, the occasionally reciting some shlokas and then bringing the story in the pravachana or upanyasa style. That's again a katha pravachana, but it's not seen so much as a performance as a discourse, a lecture. So these are the various forms. Have I answered what you did I ramble?
No, not at all. And in fact, there was one more I was hoping you'd speak about. This word kalakshepa is a very interesting word. Would you speak about that a little bit?
Well, that brings in that kind of sense of piety to it, devotion. What are you doing? You're spending your time, kalakshepa, listening to good, auspicious stories of devotees. So Harikatha, and some others want to call it Katha Kalakshepa. Katha, listening to the stories of the Lord, is in itself a pious act. It can only ennoble you, enrich you. And time spent Kalakshepa, instead of doing other things, gossiping about the man or woman 3 houses from your house, you spend it much more, beneficially to your own self, inner self, by spending it wisely and piously. So that when that katha kalakshepa is used, I think there is a certain indication that you're not frittering away your valuable time. You're spending it, in a beneficial way. That is really Harikatha, but that sense of kalakshepa is not kalaharana, wasting time, but it is kalakshepa, katha kalakshepa, spending time with ennobling stories.
Yes, yeah.
Listening to ennobling stories. So there is that slight indication of value in the terminology katha kalakshepa.
That's a lovely answer. Thank you very much. So, Anant, there is so much in your performance, Australian audience in its foreignness, but you surprise everybody and delight everybody by the Australian content that you've added to that. So, not only is the story of the killing of the Kookaburra in the middle of your performance a delight for Australian audiences because we can instantly relate to it. I'm sure it was of particular interest also to our international audiences. And I was wondering if you would speak briefly about how you came up with the idea of inserting that wonderful but very sad story about the death of the kookaburra into your performance.
Yeah, that was a lucky one. And in my earlier performances, in a couple of them of the Crown Chavada, I didn't have it. I didn't know about it. But what triggered it was an invitation by the State Library of South Australia, many, many years ago now, where they were running a series, Poetry from Around the World. And they wanted me to do the origin of, the Indian poetry thing. And what better than the story of the creation of Ramayana? So I performed it to an exclusively Australian audience. There was hardly 2 or 3 Indians there. It was so when that invitation came in the city center in a lovely hall, uh, something made me look for bringing in some local um, flavor to the thing and the first to the performance. So the first thing I looked to try to get was something from the Aboriginal myth, traditional myth. But I wasn't successful in locating one much as I searched through internet and wherever else. So one day I walked into the library and walking amongst the shelves, I came across so many of these books. And the third book I looked at was this thin volume called Stradbroke Dreamtime. I don't know what made me open that. And and I looked at a few of her recollection, Kath Walker, Nunakal, Urjuru. And this thing, Kill to Eat, the title attracted me. And so I read it standing there next to the shelf. And then I said, look, this is it. And this has come in. So I took it home, Xeroxed it, and included it as part of the reading at the State Library of South Australia performance, which someone even wrote a very nice review of in the Libraries magazine called Link or something. That was a very satisfying one. And my young daughter, who was 7 or 8 then, but had a good voice, she read it for that. And it was, as I mentioned to you on another occasion, I think it was Valmiki's blessing. He must have made me find it.
And I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's one way of it's as I say, it's really serendipity. It was lucky chancing upon that. I don't think any other. I mean, I've since looked at other myths. There are fascinating myths, but nothing fits this story as aptly as this one does.
And the death of the kookaburra fits so well with the death of the Krancha, doesn't it?
Krancha, and both have had an effect. Both resulted in something being written, and that was a moving childhood event written beautifully by a gifted author. And of course, here we have the great epic Ramayana. So it's the parallels are too cute, if you like. It fits in so well that. But it conveys the message, that there is for everything, whether you are a priest, politician, it's a very topical subject today, or a writer, or a hunter, or an industrialist, there is a code to follow that we cannot overlook. And if you do, you kill off valuable paintings and sculptures which are 40,000 years old. And, and there is a price to pay for that if you do that.
And one of the particular innovations of this performance, Anant, is the inclusion of the young Indigenous performer, Chiana Walker.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really special feature. And I felt that she felt that she owned that narrative in some way, Anant.
Yes, she felt quietly at home. We hadn't met before, and that was the first time, and she'd only read it once or twice to herself. But she had absolutely no difficulty, uh, reading it and being a part of it all. And it all came together rather nicely. It's amazing how we did manage to get various things together for that recording.
For those in the audience who joined us a little bit late, I'm very keen to, this is supposed to be a question and answer, but it's not just my questions. So please, Mahananda or Nadika or Sharon, if you have any questions, please, you're most welcome to type them into the chat box, or if you put your hand up, you're most welcome to join us in this room as well. So please don't be shy. We're a small, friendly group, and your questions would be most welcome. While you're thinking of your questions, I've got another one for Anant. Would you tell us a little bit about your musical accompanist, Anant?
Well, that was at one stage you could say purely typical Indian tendency for dynastic trading, but that's not what it was. It was pure necessity. In those days, I'm now talking about, I started performing now more than 40 years ago now. It happened because in those days, pre-internet and CDs and other things were less known. There was people who were asking for people like me, whom they somehow, when they look at us, they think we know something, to tell stories. I started telling stories, but there were not many people who could accompany. If there was one somewhere else, and they were not they could play the harmonium, but they would not necessarily be at. Accompanying is a different art form than just playing an instrument. Not everybody who can play an instrument can accompany. So there was nobody. And in fact, one or two of my earlier performances, I just performed with no accompaniment. But once my daughters, they had some talent for music, not as a main thing, but certainly they were musical enough to be given the chance to learn piano and voice and so on. They picked up enough skills. So as soon as my older one could play the keyboard on the piano, I bought a keyboard and asked her to start playing around on that one. She obliged and began to pick up. And at one stage, when she became very good at it, now she's a little busy and not as familiar with it, with the keys, these keys, because her fingers are busy doing other things nowadays. But at one stage, she became quite a virtuoso. She used to accompany others for classical performances in her late school days. So I threw her at the deep end, as I said, and she started accompanying me whenever I could in Adelaide and so on. And even when we moved to Canberra, she happened to be around in Sydney, and sometimes she would come down from Sydney and play. My second one also was good in piano and voice. So she also stood in occasionally, but her strength was more the voice, reading. She had a loud, domineering voice, being the second one, imperious. She used to, so she was good at reading the Kookaburra story and other things. Yeah. She would also come. In fact, in London, when I performed at the SOAS thing, she accompanied me on the keyboard and did an exceptionally good job. The SOAS one was much written about. I don't know whether you've seen it in the Sanskrit reading room. Lydia organized it in 2019, I think. And So that's how the family, because there was nobody else around, they came in and they were happy to do it. I think they didn't, if they were free, they didn't grumble taking part. So that was nice.
Now, Anant, you had mentioned that you were about 3 when your grandfather started teaching you some stotras or some stutis, and your own grandson is nearly 3. What does
Well,
the...
I'm hoping to. I'm hoping to if I can. But my grandfather, what challenge I face now, my grandfather didn't have to face. There is a lovely thing, exceptionally good thing called bluey.
Oh,
And
yes, we know.
when children get addicted to bluey, there is there are addictions and addictions. But I mean, it's also it's one of the pride of us. It's a lovely production.
Mm.
I don't know whether you agree, but I think it's a beautiful. It's something that Australia, children's things. There are a few nice contributions from Australia. If you go in London, I saw quite a few of these Australian things as part of children's, entertainment and educational TV.
Yes.
And Bluey is addictive. And
So,
I'm still hoping that I'll break through the Bluey
Bluey barrier.
barrier and get to him.
Get some
He-
airplay. You can't get the airplay. Oh,
yes,
dear.
yes.
And I can see our old friend Chandra Bhushan has joined us. So Chandra, please, this is a question and answer session. So if you have any questions, please don't be shy about asking. And Anant is very friendly and he's very, very able to answer anything that you would like to ask about.
Did we see him at one of the philosophy sessions or?
Quite possibly, yes, yeah. Anant, you've had a long day and I've had a long day. And again, I would really, are there any questions from Angela or Chandra or Colin or Daniela or Mahananda or Nadika or Shruti?
Which is Mahananda here? Is it the Mahananda that I know?
Timul Sina, Mahananda Timul Sina.
She's one of the participants here. Yeah, I've seen the name.
Yes, yeah. If you folk don't have any questions, or we could do it this way. Anant, is there anything else that you would like to talk about at this stage? What haven't we talked about?
What can we talk about?
Yeah, I know, I've got one. Your future plans. What are you working on at the moment?
Well, I don't know whether Sadananda Das is in the audience or is he's chairing a session, isn't he? Or has he finished his chairing?
It must, I think that's tomorrow evening, actually.
Yeah. Well, he invited me at Leipzig, which was a very eventful visit earlier this year. And while talking about various things, he said, Anandji, it's lovely Ramayana and everybody should enjoy it. But, the trend now is Buddhism. Everybody wants Buddha. And everywhere in the academic world, it's Buddhism. Why don't you do something on Buddhism? I said, look, that would be presumptuous because much as I have a great soft corner for Buddhism as I understand it in a very minimal way, I haven't got enough, authenticity to do a katha on Buddhism. But as I was talking, it occurred to me that there is a great Buddhist work in Sanskrit, a Sanskrit kavya, one of the great kavyas, Ashwaghosa's Buddha Charita. And it is my ambition to try and, at least from the 14 chapters that are unambiguously and without any doubt attributed to Ashwagosha and some others, whether there is, I'm reading the shlokas and I'm hoping that I'll find enough interesting things to put together one or maybe two or three short performances based on that. The Buddha Charita is what I'm currently looking at.
Well,
That's work in preparation. I've declared it, so no one else lay your hands on it.
I've just noticed some questions. I'm sorry, I had not picked this up before, but our audience have indeed asked some questions. There's a question from Shruti. Shruti says, "Hello, sir. Your topic is sage Valmiki, and I would like to know if I can get an account of Valmiki's life. What are the authentic sources to know about his life before he became a sage?" Can you help with that, Anant? Are there any accounts? Do we know anything about Valmiki at all?
Look, there are many stories about how he was himself such a thoughtless hunter and lived a very wicked life, and a change came over. But I personally don't know of any what I would call first grade authentic text from which this background of Valmiki, the Indian imagination, especially in these matters, is very rich. So in the Mahabharata stories and in the Ramayana stories, there is the main story, but then there has been a lot of weaving off of various side stories. For example, in the Ramayana also, there are brilliant Harikathas about Airavana, Mairavana, and all these other things. Fascinating stories which are the substance for Harikatha performers. So this story of him having been this conversion is a very fascinating, the change in life, life, transformative incident in life is a very attractive theme, probably in every culture and civilization, and very much so in the Indian one. It abounds. For example, the great Purandaradasa, who is considered the grandfather of Carnatic music, was a very rich, greedy merchant who had a moment when he had a life-changing experience, and then he became a renunciate. So that kind of thing about Valmiki, the hunter, the shloka is about a curse on a hunter. It's given rise to various subsidiary books and stories. I have heard them all and I've read minor books, but I can't really, recommend a book that I would myself trust about that kind of background. So to me, the beginning of Valmiki is Tapaswadhyaya Niratam Tapasvi Vagvidam Muram Naradam Paripapracha Valmikihi Munipungava. He's already a Munipungava. Well, Munipungava here is Narada, of course, but Valmiki himself is also a Muni, as the subsequent shlokas indicate. I'm perfectly happy to start with him as as a sage, very much concerned with the welfare of humanity and the human condition. And that beginning of Valmiki is good enough for me. But I have looked for authentic sources. I must repeat myself once again. I haven't found one. I'm not saying there isn't one. I haven't found one. Apart from the secondary and tertiary kind of books where you get all these other adventures, you get this about Mahabharata stories, you get this about the Ramayana. Rama and Lakshmana are kidnapped and kept in a fortress, and Airavana, Mairavana, or some magic offshoots of Ravana do. All this is not in Valmiki Ramayana. But that shouldn't and need not stop people from creating fantasy stories. I mean, fantasy is not the privilege of the modern scientific and other writers, or J.K. Rowling for that matter. It's been around for a long time. So people have created fantasy and fantasy-based stories around these epics for a very, very long time. So much so that it is a problem sometimes to, some of them have gained so much currency that people think it's part of the main epics, and most of these are not.
Thanks. Thank you for that answer. There's a very nice comment from Colin Barnes here. Colin is a friend and a student here at the Australian National University. Colin says, "Thank you so much. I have no questions, just appreciation." So thank you very much for that feedback, Colin.
Thank you.
There's a question from Daniela that I missed. Daniela, yes, you have missed this performance, but it's recorded and you can access it either by clicking on the rolling banner on the front of the conference portal, or you can go to the resource collection and you'll find the entire 1 hour performance there. Of course, you could talk Anant into performing in Switzerland, I'm sure, but you probably won't get our young Indigenous performer to come along as well. So please.
Is Daniela in Switzerland, is she?
Daniela is in Switzerland, yes. Yeah.
Oh, I see. It's not the Daniela that we met at your coffee in...
No, different Daniela, yeah.
Okay.
And Nadika has said, it's interesting to know how these code of conducts join us across cultures. Anant, do you keep a lookout for little stories to add to your Qatar sessions? Is this something that you did a lot in India? I guess this is not a skill that can be learnt at university. That's a question from Nadika.
I have basically tried to look for stories based on classics, on authentic textual sources, not raconteurs type of stories. Not that I decry it. I think it's a great art, weaving stories. So I just thought that if I had some gift, it was to bring the textual sources, make it accessible to everybody. Can't read every text, so I do look for stories from generally these sources, either the epics or the classics, primarily in the languages that I know well, Kannada, and Sanskrit. I can claim to know it well enough to be able to read and make some sense of. So from these sources, I'm always on the lookout. But the other incentive is an occasion. If an occasion demands looking at a certain story, you go and look for it too. But the Bhagavatam has been my main source for majority of these stories. And as I have written elsewhere, in the Bhagavatam stories are, sometimes they suffer because they come from a very devout background. So somebody who is not too keen on getting entangled with highly devout or ritual-based things might fight shy of the Bhagavatam stories. But once you have penetrated, as you would know through the Vishnu Purana work you have done, once you have crossed that, that general packaging, the stories in themselves are very profound. It's not simply the message of devotion to Vishnu or another form of deity and finding salvation or finding this or the other. They're all, at least at some stage, would have been created, I suspect, by people who are looking at solutions to various issues of that we come across in life. And eventually, they found a solution which was the devotional one. That's why it comes into the Bhagavatam thing. But that in itself does not diminish the relevance of these stories. The Bhagavatam is an unending source of fantastic stories that one can, with skill, relate. When we often use this cliché term that these books are relevant at all times, what it means is, when it was written, whether people thought of some of the interpretations that give to it is neither here nor there. But in today's world, with today's sensibilities and the experience that humanity has gone through over these, few hundred to 2000 years, the same words, the same texts mean quite a lot. For example, in the Muchukunda story, when that demon starts chasing Krishna, Krishna walks away, and this demon Kalayana chases him. And then suddenly the Bhagavatam poet puts in a story, Yoginam api durlabham. The chase is a physical chase, because the demon who is giving this challenge to Krishna is after pure physical power. He's looking for a worthy champion who can give him an equal fight in a physical fight. But when he is chasing Krishna, Kalayana, for all purposes, is engaged in a physical chase. But suddenly the Bhagavatam poet makes this comment, Yoginam api durlabham. Where is this, spindly looking, hungry looking yogi? And where is Kalayana? So he's really talking about, he's seeing already this chase as an allegorical chase, an issue. To reach Krishna is a very different, is a different goal altogether. Then suddenly it's not just the physical Krishna who is running, who is going somewhere, and Kalayana is following him, chasing him, but it is a destiny, a pursuit of something higher. And Kalayana becomes a face of, suddenly it is the human pursuit for dominance over something